heard the phrase growing up that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. But for some reason, it's also the easiest meal to skip every single day, especially if every morning that you wake up, you're rushing out the door to get to the next thing, to get to the next meeting, to get to the next class, and you find yourself running on just a cup of coffee and some creamer until lunchtime. And now that I'm a mom of a baby who is almost a toddler, we need breakfast in the morning. And breakfast is actually one of my favorite meals of the day. But I just like it when I'm not the one who has to make it. There is something that is so unmotivating about waking up in the morning and immediately having to head to the kitchen to get something fixed up, make the kitchen all dirty, just so that we can eat breakfast. And so up until now, I've really done without it most days because I would be the only person eating it. So what I've done to make breakfast doable in our house is I have some simple go-to meals that I can prep the night before or don't take me very long in the morning, so I can make sure that I get something on the table in the morning that is nourishing for me and my son and my husband if he is also home. That doesn't mean that I don't still start my day with a cup of coffee. I actually learned recently from another YouTuber, Hopewell Heights, about her egg yolk coffee recipe. This coffee recipe can be done with really espresso, black coffee, however you want to make it. I'm using a pour over today, but I typically use a French press. Unfortunately, I broke mine this week, so the pour over it is. But you start off with a couple tablespoons of heavy cream, and you want to froth that up until it kind of thickens. So you can use a frother, or I use an immersion blender. About a tablespoon of maple syrup, a scoop of collagen powder, as well as 1 egg yolk. And then I just save the egg whites for whatever I'm making later that morning. You want to continue mixing all of those together until everything is nice and frothy and you can kind of see the air bubbles in this like custardy mixture. And then you will just pour your coffee over top, and it is the most delicious, frothy coffee that you could make at home. I do actually work outside of our home 2 days out of the week on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So I try to get up early enough to still have this little routine, but drinking coffee and just having a slow morning has always been something that I love to do. So I try to get up early enough and just give myself a little bit of time to enjoy it before we jump right into making breakfast. Starting off this week on Sunday, and where our family is at this week is my husband has gotten off work at about 6 a.m. this morning. He works 48-hour shifts and has the next 96 hours off. So I love making breakfast for our family on the mornings that he comes home super hungry. And I am looking to make something that is quick, that is filling, and that I know he will like. And my husband is an eggs, sausage, biscuit, pancake kind of guy. So this morning we are going to have some breakfast tacos. We live in Texas, and a couple days ago I found myself at H-E-B. If you're a Texan, you know. And it was late, and my husband was still working, and it was getting close to dinner time, and I just happened to find myself next to the tortilla bakery, and I couldn't help but pick some up because I knew that I could quickly make up some tacos when I got home for dinner. So the inspiration behind this meal this morning is I had some leftover tortillas that I wanted to use up with some breakfast burritos. So I am shredding some white cheddar cheese, getting ready to scramble some eggs, and I also have a few chicken sausages that I have been keeping in the freezer that I bought a long time ago for a camping trip that we didn't end up going on. Don't keep a lot of those convenience foods on hand, but I want to go ahead and use them up. I'd rather not waste them, and they're not too terrible for you. So we're going to throw them into our breakfast burritos this morning. This meal really is so easy to whip together, no matter what tortillas you're using, store-bought or homemade. You usually have a few extra lying around after a taco night. Just some scrambled eggs is the perfect base, any kind of cheese that you have, and you can turn the flavors into anything. You can add hot sauce, you can add barbecue sauce, you can do any kind of pork, you can use ham, bacon style, sausage, chicken sausage, really anything that you want to add. And you can even make it more diverse with the toppings like sauces and different things like that. We're keeping them simple this morning, just sausage, egg, and cheese, but that is enough to keep my family happy, and it can also feed my toddler. So as I'm planning meals this week, I'm also trying to keep in mind that I am feeding a baby who's about to be 1. So I'm kind of in the middle of calling him a baby and calling him a toddler because he's getting so big, but he only has 2 teeth right now. So when I am making meals, I'm trying to keep in mind, okay, what is soft enough or what can be cut up small enough for him to eat without choking or not being able to enjoy it with us. I'm not really a fan of having to cook separate meals for every person in the family, so I just try to keep this in mind as I'm making meals for all of us. And this meal turned out to be such an easy way to use up some ingredients that had been sitting in my fridge, and it made such a colorful plate with the extra fruit on the side. Helps me get breakfast on the table in the morning is doing anything that I can to prepare the night before. So it is still Sunday in this clip that you're seeing, and I am prepping a sourdough French toast casserole for Monday morning. This actually tastes best when you prepare it the night before because the bread that you're using has time to soak up all of the ingredients. But what I'm getting together now is this egg milk mixture that's going to make it like the classic French toast that we all know. I believe the recipe is 4 eggs and 2 cups of milk. It calls for a half cup of brown sugar, but I usually use a third. I'm kind of experimenting with using honey or maple syrup instead, but today I just reached for brown sugar. And then the recipe doesn't call for this, but I always add a little bit of cinnamon. You're going to take any leftover bread that you have and just cube it up. My favorite is to just have a sourdough bowl. My family of 3 typically doesn't eat all of that in one sitting. So I take half of it, cube it up, throw it in the fridge or the freezer to make this specific casserole. It's so simple. I put half of my cubed bread on the bottom, pour the mixture on top, add the rest of the bread and pour the rest of the mixture on top. And then what you're going to do is you're just going to let that sit in the fridge overnight, and the bread's going to soak up all of that delicious goodness so that in the morning, all you have to do is wake up and pop it in the oven. This casserole bakes around 400 to 425 degrees in the oven for about an hour. So usually my routine will be to get up, make my morning coffee, and just go ahead and get the oven preheated. So shortly after, we will be ready to have breakfast. And then you can top it with whatever you want. I usually like to make a sort of cream cheese frosting that is naturally sweetened with maple syrup. So that's what you see me making right now. I want to say that I got the recipe from Farmhouse on Boone's cinnamon roll recipe. This is her cream cheese topping that she puts on it. And now I just use it for everything because it's so simple. So when you're baking the French toast casserole, the recipe says to bake for about 45 minutes. Sometimes I have to add a little bit of time so that all of the liquid has fully cooked into the bread. And then while that's cooling off, you can go ahead and make your cream cheese frosting. So it takes about 4 ounces of cream cheese, about a half a cup of heavy cream. If you run out of heavy cream, I've found that using just a little bit of milk works out too. It just might be more of like a glaze texture. And then you're going to use about a 1/4 of a cup to a 1/2 a cup of maple syrup and a dash of vanilla. Let that cook on the stove for just a little bit, get it all melted together. And sometimes I use an immersion blender to get all of the cream cheese chunks out. And when that is hot and all cooked together, you want to pour it over top your French toast casserole. Other great topping ideas for this would be to use Greek yogurt. You could just do fruit and maple syrup if you wanted to, but the frosting is my favorite because I like a little bit of sweetness to my French toast. Now, keep in mind, French toast is a little bit of like an eggy texture depending on how you make it. And so sometimes depending on how much bread you use, this recipe can come out with some eggy bits in between, if that makes sense. I actually like that because it's really easy for me to feed that to my son, knowing that he's getting a little bit more protein in those bites. But if you don't prefer that, you might want to use a bit more bread or maybe try a different recipe that doesn't call for as many eggs. But I like using this because I know that the protein content is higher with all of those eggs in there. And on this particular morning, no one else was in the mood for breakfast except me, so I poured myself a glass of raw milk and just enjoyed this the way that it was, didn't make it too fancy, and saved the rest to eat tomorrow, which is Tuesday, because I will be leaving for work early in the morning. I can take my son with me to work, but we have to leave by 8 a.m. So I typically make a breakfast the day before where I can enjoy the leftovers the next morning before work. So I know that we're eating breakfast, but I don't have to put in the time and the effort to make something completely new. The next time that you're seeing me make breakfast, it's now Wednesday. I am whipping together a baked oatmeal. So I actually could have prepped some of this last night, but since we had some friends over for dinner and I had spent the day at work, it just didn't happen. And that's okay. It's pretty quick to whip together in the morning, but like I said before, the more I do the day before, the more likely I am to actually get breakfast on the table the next day. So if you were prepping this ahead of time, I'd recommend just putting all of the dry ingredients into your casserole dish, covering it with a towel and leaving it on the counter. That way the next morning you can just come and add the wet ingredients and throw it in the oven. But I am making a banana bread baked oatmeal. I will link a similar recipe for you guys down in the description box. This is kind of one that I look up a recipe as a guide every time, but then I'm sort of tweaking things to make it the way that I like. So I'll link that below for you guys, but this is really similar to the sourdough French toast recipe, except your base is oatmeal instead of cubed bread. And then you can really add in anything you want, but my favorite is the banana bread take because you get to add walnuts for a little bit of extra crunch, and I love the sweetness of banana bread. This dish also needs to bake for close to an hour, so while I'm waiting for that, I go ahead and get started on some bagels that I know we can eat later in the week. And this bagel recipe is from Farmhouse on Boone, but I am using fresh milled flour instead of all-purpose. I'm going to use hard white wheat in the same exact gram amounts that her recipe calls for all-purpose flour. I actually prefer bagels that are made completely with whole grains. To me, they are just easier to work with and it's really flavorful and they're really simple to make. They're mostly just flour, sourdough starter, salt, and then you add a little bit of sweetener. And I just throw all of these ingredients into my mixer and it mixes for about 10 minutes until the dough is very dense. I also used my sourdough starter that was fresh out of the fridge. I haven't fed it in multiple days, so I know that these are probably going to take a bit longer to rise, but even though my starter's not active, they will still rise. It will just take a bit longer, but luckily we have a hot day on the forecast, and so my kitchen's going to be warm, and so I'm hopeful that they will probably rise as much as they need to within about 12 hours. After I was done mixing up those bagels, it was time to take our oatmeal out of the oven. And you, of course, could eat this all by itself, but I like to bulk it up with some Greek yogurt and different toppings that I might have on hand. You could use peanut butter, you could cut up bananas, you could pour some more maple syrup. But today I just decided to throw some blueberries on top, and it turned out to be such a delicious breakfast that, like I said before, is easy to feed to my baby who is kind of turning into a toddler. So he can have all of these things alongside of me. These bagels turned into a little bit of a labor of love, but that's okay because it still was a stress-free process, but none of the process went according to what a recipe online might say. So on Wednesday is when I mixed up this dough and I let it rest all day and ferment, and then in the evening while I was cooking dinner, I went over and shaped the bagels, but I knew that the next day on Thursday that I was going to have to go to work. So after I shaped those bagels, I put a wet towel on top and stuck them in the fridge for 24 hours. And so when I got home from work on Thursday in the evening before we went to bed, I took those out and set them on the counter for their second rise. And now what you're seeing is on Friday morning, after their second rise lasted probably 8, 9, 10 hours, somewhere around there, they were nice and puffy and ready to be baked. This process can be a little bit intimidating at first if you've never made bagels before, but once you get the hang of it, it's really fast. So what you do is bring a pot of water to a boil, and you're going to add in a tablespoon of baking soda and a tablespoon of brown sugar. And you're going to first boil your bagels, then you're going to bake them in the oven. And I boil them on each side for about 30 seconds. I find that if I do anything longer than that, they're going to look a little bit puffy. So you boil them on each side for 30 seconds, and while they're still a little bit damp and warm, you're going to dip them into your topping of choice. Mine is usually everything bagel seasoning because I like how well that pairs with just a cream cheese when you're eating your bagels. And then once you've finished boiling all of them, you're going to put them in the oven and bake for about 20 to 25 minutes, depending how brown you like your bagels. Making bagels for my small family is that even when I make one batch and I have plenty left over, they store really well in the freezer. So I will go ahead and cut those bagels in half, put them in a Ziploc bag, and throw them in the freezer to be put into a toaster or warmed up in the oven for a quick breakfast. For my son and I this morning, we decided to give them an avocado toast spin. So we topped them with cream cheese, some mashed avocado, as well as scrambled eggs. And then the fruit that we had left by the end of the week this week was just some clementines. So I peeled a few of those for us to enjoy with our bagels this morning, and it was the perfect filling snack. And if you cut it up just right, it's safe for the baby too. The last recipe that I want to share with you from this week is on Saturday morning, and we decided to get a little bit creative and have some crepes. My husband had just gotten home from work this morning, and we wanted to spice things up in the kitchen and make something that I typically don't make. I think I've only actually made crepes once before, and they were sourdough crepes, and no one in our family really liked that little tang that sourdough has. So this morning we are going with classic crepes with milk, flour, and eggs with a cottage cheese filling. And the trick here is to make sure that your skillet is hot before you put any of the batter in, and make sure that you put in a fat like butter so that it doesn't stick to the pan. But I am getting this all mixed up, and looking back, I realized I probably could have also done this the night before, but I didn't really get the idea to do crepes until the morning, so that's all right. I had the time and I had the extra help from my husband to keep the baby busy while I was doing this. Additionally, we also had some cottage cheese filling to really up the protein content of this breakfast. And that was really simple. It was just cottage cheese, a little bit of maple syrup, and some heavy cream to smooth things out. But I went ahead and mixed up all of those base ingredients for the crepe mixture together. And you want to let that rest for about 10-15 minutes, which is perfect if you're going to go ahead and make a filling. It takes about the same amount of time. While you're doing that, you want to also go ahead and preheat your skillet. You want it to be nice and hot before you put the batter in. And you also want to melt some butter or another kind of fat on the skillet so that the crepes don't stick. That's really the trick for getting a skillet or even a stainless steel pan to be non-stick while you are cooking. But what I did is I put about a half a cup of batter into my skillet and just kind of rotated it around so that the batter was thinly covering the entire bottom, and cooked the crepes for about 1 minute on each side. And these turned out to be so delicious for only my second time making them. They are definitely going to be another family staple. I hope you guys enjoyed following along for my family's breakfast meals this week. I hope that they inspired you to make something new in your kitchen, and I would love for you to tell me in the comments below, what is a breakfast staple that your family loves that we should give a try in our house? Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next week.